the universe is vast, and the only thing really that matters is how we use our time.
This assumption of if I put a lot of effort in, a lot will come out. Sometimes the opposite is true.
We are surrendered to busyness because we do not know anymore what we're supposed to do with our time.
They know they're using AI. They don't know where the time savings is going.
Very often we default to very easy uses of time, often on our phones.
We always tend to think about our time, not as like our individual time, but subconsciously we just transition to collaboration mode.
I'm super happy to be in Zurich today, gathering the gang from the Doodle Time Institute sort of officially for the first time. Today is kind of really important milestone where we're coming together to exchange and reflect a bit, but also most importantly look forward. Yeah, but then let's start. I'm super happy that you're all here. Like we've been collaborating for some time, writing together, thinking together, and now at least some of us are here together. Super nice.
I'm happy to.
Well, sweet. It was about time.
It was about time, indeed. And so we can obviously talk about everything, which is the interesting thing about time, right? But it would be cool to just land and we all spent quite a lot of energy on this last few months. What is it that sparked you to be part of this? What was it that sort of for you is the thing that fascinates you? Because I think what we all share is that this is not like, okay, this is a thing that we're joining, this is a thing we're shaping. So it would be great to just have your sort of, not midway, but sort of as we get started, what fascinates you about this quest that we're on? Marc?
Okay. For me, it's the universe is vast, and there's one planet that we know has life on it, and we are a dominant species on that planet, really influential, and the only thing really that matters is what we do, and when we do it, basically how we use our time. And you can see with the technology that's evolved recently, there's a lot of it, particularly recently we had the internet, we had computers, we have the internet, then smartphones and social media, and now AI. A lot of that is amazing in all kinds of ways, but it also takes away some of our agency, takes away a lot of our time. And so I think we're at a point in 2026 where we're really addressing that in a meaningful way with tests, with experiments, with discussions, bringing different people with different perspectives is actually important. So that's one of a number of reasons. Another reason is that I like you guys, and hanging out with you is and discussing some of these things with you, like we were at dinner last night, like we are now, is enjoyable as well. But it also feels important, not just enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
A good use of time, you might say. I was just thinking, why would you start with something like this? As like the universe, right? It's how would you follow something like this? Yeah. But it's I don't know. For me, I would say it's the more you read about it, the more you realize how little we understand about it. And it's I think naturally, a few of us sitting here are still in our 20s, right? So it's the more you advance in life, the more then the reflection on time comes, and you realize there are moments where it's very cool, and there are moments that feel like condensed, like COVID felt like 3 years in a second, and then there are other times that feel very productive, or not productive is the wrong word, more rewarding and long, right? In a way, wow, I did so many things in this short period of time, and it felt so good. And how can we have more of those moments, especially now when robots take over the world and we have all the time that we could spend and their agents? So what do we do with that? And the realization, okay, it's not straightforward. And if we can help humanity, do that a little bit better and have at least the feeling of time, it was well spent, then, let's do that together.
Yeah. And that's the very human side where, for me, also fascinating as you dig in. People are different, they experience time different, even though we sometimes have assumed if you're in the same time zone, it's the same time. And Rebecca, you've worked a lot on that side, and meetings is the symbol of people actually have to come together. And I guess we all know that you're not always in the same mode when there happens to be a meeting. So what was it that thought your work fits into this? movement?
I think time is really interesting, right? Because it's both something that is so innately human. Our day-to-day work is very much dictated by time, and our organizations are as well. You know, when we think about how we set goals, our projects, you know, our day-to-day tasks, when we show up at work, when we go home, it's so influenced by time. And yet rarely do we take a step back and think about, okay, has this time been intentionally designed, and how can we more effectively design it? And meetings are the tip of the iceberg. And I think, you know, relative to other aspects of time, we probably know more about meetings than we do other aspects. And, you know, when we think about AI, now we're seeing people's rhythms and work fundamentally change. Once they hit the token limit, you know, they're switching to another task in ways that we don't understand and we certainly haven't optimized for.
I mean, that's also interesting that the most sophisticated AI users spend more time optimizing for token usage than for the quality of their time. Which takes me to you, Alan, who also represents the treasure that we have at the Doodle Time Institute, which goes back to all the 18 years of data that we've graciously inherited from Doodle. But for you personally, what was it that, as a data geek, what's your view on time?
So the overall idea was that with my love to machine learning, or AI, what we call it now, is to help in different aspects of human life, right? Like I wrote some papers in finance, right? Like how to utilize AI for risks assessments or what's not. The same did for medical, right? Like the how to help patients with systems and tools from AI on the either in hospitals or in a home environment. And now when Christian told me about this idea, like I immediately started thinking, all right, but it's not only about the time as itself, right? Like perspective, flow of time, or like relativity of time, or what's not, right? Like from physical aspect, even like biological aspects, all right? If I'm with you guys, for me, times is, you know, very fast, but then I remember it very long. It's very interesting effect. But then I thought, all right, we have data, we have general understanding how to build very smart, maybe complex, maybe over-engineered, what's not, but smart systems that can help humanity to be better at living their time, right? Because whatever the factual and biological or physical aspects of time, the subjective feel of time is what matter for us to be together, or for anyone, right? So, and if we can improve it and affect it with data and machine learning, or even, you know, going forward to world models, social models, that would be something that exciting.
I think it's fascinating the terminology we use around time too. You know, we often say, you know, we're going to spend an hour, or we spent an hour doing this, versus, you know, we invested an hour. And so I'm thinking about, okay, how does the psychology of this also play, and the words we use, and how we frame time to our employees and to ourselves.
And I mean, for a long time, we've been sort of quite. I mean, I suppose most of us are quite imprinted by our parents, and subtly also from grandparents. And both of these generations, for most of us alive now, have been in an industrial paradigm. And I mean, I've been working with experience and service design for a long time, where you always sort of come back to, well, that is new. We're still used to clocking in at the factory. We're still used, I mean, all the management literature has been based on, you know, the input is proportionate to the output, which hasn't been true for decades, but we're still stuck in models and you know, it's interesting how that is still in stuff that we take for granted. So the question is a little bit, if our mission is to help people discover a new sense of time and a new way of either finding agency. We talked a lot about intent. What's your hope for this? Let's maybe jump forward. What could we hope for?
My hope is that, I mean, we have, since the time of people clocking in, clocking out, we've moved into, over the last few decades, knowledge work. And we have close to 1 billion people that do knowledge work for a living. And these people, they don't need to clock in, clock out, but they still have this mindset like you're saying. So if there are some things that we can do like really practically to help, a proportion of that huge number, be more intentional. So that would mean better use of time for them, but it's a feeling as well. It's if you use your time well and you can reflect on and know what it is that you've done in that day or that last week or whatever, you feel better yourself. So what can we hope for? I think maybe it's not like a complete shift, but to bring an awareness to quite a lot of people who have quite a lot of control over their time, because that is the case for most knowledge workers, where the real value that they add is in the high quality work that they do, not necessarily for working 8 hours or 10 hours or 4 hours or a set period of time. So some minor changes in behavior or mindset that affect hundreds of millions of people. That's all.
Mm. I mean, I just want to do a detour. If you think about the data, Alan, the data you have or we have is really spanning the globe, and not only knowledge workers. It's like associations, all kind of interesting things where people are coming together. What patterns do you see from a data perspective in how much do people have control? Because I think it's an interesting question. We're assuming just because you're a knowledge worker, you're in control. But what about everybody else? How do people plan how they're spending time when we look at it from a data point of view?
Well, it's interesting, right, that you mentioned that the data covers literally like whole planet, right? Like even the areas that you might be surprised, like the little isolated islands, and people there use the tools to connect with people within that island and with people far, far away, right? And what we saw that obviously surge of the usage and of online tools and demand for connectivity with intent, because in order to create this request, I want to meet you. This is 5 options. We could make it work, right? And then you saw it's very kind of intentional, and it seems that it is across the humanity. The moment the people realize that they want to work together, they basically turn themselves into this planning agent, if you would like, right? Mm-hmm. The strong intent. Okay, what tool? All right, Doodle, tack, set up the meetings and invite, done, it's ready, right? And it's not like for specific industries. We obviously see a lot of usage in education, but at the same time in business, right? Like the organizing exec meetings or what's not, right? As well as like super simple stuff, right? Let's meet up for barbecue. So this like the ability of humanity to value connectivity and become intentional about that is something that you can see through data, like what we have. That's interesting. Yeah.
So we can take that idea of helping people unlock their own possibilities, kind of to lots of people.
Well, like this is what we see through data, right? That it's universal, right? Like obviously knowledge workers, they will benefit from better understanding of time and how you spend it and being intentional about that. But we also see that it is like universal, right? Mm-hmm. Like the need is universal. So that if we can start with, let's say, knowledge workers, right? And the more creative occupations or what's not. But it somehow, and internet also shows that, right? That even if it started, if cool kids started it, right? It's still spread through the whole planet, like and it's there.
And you used the word universal a few times now, and what I find interesting, and what I think one of the 3 things that I would see for the Doodle Time Institute is to establish a language for time. Like you said it, like in our like using English as a language, we spend time, we waste time, we give it. When you think about other cultures, they do not have these words for that specific concept. So we do not have math, right? Everybody in every language has the same sort of like symbolism to talk to each other. For time, we don't have that, just based on that. So I think if we can help, to your point, right, have a little bit more reflection or a start of a language that helps us understand what time really means, in the different contexts. I think that we would advance the conversation and make it relevant again, right, across the world, right, which is I think super important and not hasn't been a focus. The other thing I would say, it's at least for the institute, it's not about optimization of anything. Right? We're not trying to squeeze more stuff in, right? It's not about productivity here, right? It's around almost getting back the agency, right, to understand what you're trying to do, right? There's the book 4,000 Weeks, right, essentially says and argues that, our whole intent to optimize, time efficiency hacks and so on, is proof that we are basically, surrendered to busyness because we do not know anymore what we're supposed to do with our time. In theory, as we do right now, we can do whatever we want. But we sometimes do not know, so we optimize to squeeze even more in. So like we surrender to busyness because we don't know. So if we can give back a little bit of agency, especially now that, at Doodle we've essentially solved, instant meetings, right? It can happen all the time, then the question doesn't become anymore when, it becomes what do I spend my time on, right? So if we can do that, would be amazing.
I think you can get to agency a little bit more clearly if you take as your context outside of work.
Yeah.
So in work, of course, then there's performance, there's productivity,
Sure.
and you do need to achieve things. But outside of work, you've actually got a lot more choice. So like even if you do have a job which is 9 to 5 and you're clocking in, clocking out, okay. But outside of that job, you've got your time.
Yeah.
And there are different things that you can do. And of course, you still have responsibilities, and there are some things that can't be moved around. But if you sit down and really think about what matters to you as a human being, like maybe it is to volunteer, maybe it is to spend more time with your child, maybe it's an elderly relative or someone in the community, like a neighbor. But very often we default to very easy uses of time, often on our phones. Instead of doing things that we know would make us feel better in the long term, be better for society. And this is, for me, exactly what linking your use of time to intention. If you carve out a little bit of space and time to think about what your intentions are and connect with your intentions, and then you can make some sort of a plan to actually, see them through and do them and feel better about yourself as a human being.
Yeah, and I think both in private and at work, you default to things that you think you ought to do. And that could be for different reasons. Mindset, you think that's the only choice you have, and so on. So I think that's where agency is not necessarily easy to attain for everybody. But if we look at your work, Rebecca, on how do people get the chance to actually influence what they do, because I think the principle is the same, that you take that step back and you think, well, actually I have a choice here. And what is quite interesting, that this assumption of if I put a lot of effort in, a lot will come out. Sometimes the opposite is true, right? If you say, and I remember when I moved to Sweden, I've worked in Germany for a little bit, long time in London. When I came to Sweden, it hit me that the ethic and the mindset is so different. And there was a team working on this document for a client, and they had decided to put their time to create a one-pager because it was easier for them to produce, but it was also easier for the client to just, they trusted them, they had done all the analysis, so it wasn't a shortcut, but it was a mindful choice. Why don't we go out for fika? We do it as a one page and the client will be happy. And that was sort of symbolic for me, that we have that choice, but we don't always see it. So how do you see people taking that chance to affect how they're working?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, we know in organizations, we as humans suffer from many biases. I think the two ones that are really relevant for this conversation is visibility bias, right? We associate visibility with value. And because of that, when we spend our time, when we invest our time, we tend to do the things that are visible to the organization, like the meeting where you can see someone in the conference room or you can see their packed calendar, or the status report, as opposed to the deep thinking or the rewriting the email for the 13th time, because we can't we can't see that. And so I think, how we incentivize matters a lot. We also suffer from what my colleague Bob Sutton calls addition sickness, right? We solve problems as humans through addition. When we have a problem, we throw more money at it, throw more people at it, throw more meetings at it. And because of that, we see all these, perverse effects happen in organizations when we think the answer is more. We think it's more collaboration. We think it's more innovation. We think it's more velocity, when in reality, the research consistently shows it's always a bell-shaped curve, right? Too much is just as detrimental as too little, and vice versa. And I think it's hard to get people out of those mindsets because they're innately ingrained in us. And I think when we think about time and time health, this is all part of the system around, if we are going to optimize how we think about time, not necessarily optimize the time itself. I think we need to think about the system and what incentives are ingrained in our organization, and how are they contributing to different, mental models and different habits and behaviors around time.
If I saw someone's calendar, or they just told me that, okay, I've got tomorrow, I'm going to spend an hour thinking deeply, right? I would love to hear it. I very, very rarely, I don't think I've actually ever heard that. I mean, of course, I have, colleagues, people I've worked with, that they do spend some of their time thinking deeply. But I think it's a real issue, the visibility thing, like you say. I mean, of course, you could put it into your calendar and thinking deeply, but a lot of people would cynically view that. Are you really thinking deeply, or are you just having a nice, relaxing hour? And if you're really thinking deeply, like they then want to say, okay, well, what were your deep thoughts that came from it? Thinking deeply doesn't necessarily work like that. It may be that the thought comes later. And so I think it's also linked to trust and psychological safety and culture. And so you can see how the issue of time and good use of time links to these other also broad business concepts very, very immediately too. One of the reasons it's so interesting.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. And even when we think about, thinking deeply versus if you are to label it something like a strategic pause, for example, we see people respond in different ways because, covering something in an aura of strategy or innovation, we associate these words with either positive sentiment or negative, and that matters.
Is strategic pause supposed to be better?
I
think it's worse.
Really, if you see a strategic, that association, if the culture is, creating that environment where that is something that we do and that is something that we value. AI just adds another layer on this as well, because one of the most common questions I'll get from executives is they know their employees are producing work at similar qualities as before AI. They know they're using AI. They don't know where the time savings is going. And they're assuming, which is often the case, they're assuming employees are taking that time for themselves, which is often a positive, not necessarily, but it can. And that lack of clarity in terms of how is time being reinvested when it's saved, I think, the natural knee-jerk reaction is to assume that bad intent, unfortunately, and having more clarity in terms of, okay, what is the gamut of different activities that we can positively and healthily invest time versus, this lack of visibility.
But it's a misclassification of, or attribution of what you do. It's like deep work, and if you want to be creative, then research would suggest the best thing to do before is to do something mundane. Yeah. Right? So, but if you write in your calendar, I'm going to do something mundane, like what, but that's why you need for creativity. It's the same with deep thinking. It's not like in Scrubs when, thinking deep now, and then you have a funny moment, and then now I figure it out. You sit, looking in the sky right now, it's 12 o'clock, I'm going to be deep thinking. That's not how it works, right? As you said. So we need to basically give re-understand really what, the contribution or the classification of different elements are. And that's not understood right now.
And it's interesting that at least my perspective, or understanding of it that a lot of time people, especially after reading your books, right, and many others, they start booking time for being like a quality time or whatever, like the focus time, because I see it in calendars of my colleagues. But then what I also start noticing that when people are in urgent need of meeting, they use exactly that time to send an invite, right? Because like in the corporate environment, in most of the cases, you will see calendars of your teammates, and then you see that the calendar is full and there is a 2 hours focus time, and then okay, and you just try it, right?
That's the one that gets eaten up.
Exactly. So that's
Which I want to link that back to, you said time health. And if we have that, we can dig into what that is later, but just as an hopeful concept of if we could achieve it, it's a question of individuals realizing there is such a thing and they can foster it, and leaders for their organization leading in such a way that it fosters it. And like you said earlier, Rebecca, there are a lot of things we know about bell curves and what science knows. Doesn't mean leaders do it. Doesn't mean people can access it. So before we go back to what is time health, which I think is super interesting, just the scene setting. We've set out to say we focus in the first period on organizations, because that's where a lot of the impact is before we zoom in on the individual and zoom out on society. If we stay on that organizational plane and say it's an interplay between teams with each other and leaders, in your experience, what are some of the unlocks that people could access that, and where we can actually support people to discover the possibilities?
Yeah, I think, we often think about the individual level, the team level, which is super important, and the organizational level, as well as both bottom up and top down change. And I think both are important, right? We know for most things, policy is really important. Principles, understanding, as an organization, what are our values around time? And it's different for every organization. I think in the best cases, organizations will have a sentiment around, yes, we want to do certain things more efficiently, but the purpose of that is to make space for the things in work that shouldn't be highly efficient, the relationship building, the brainstorming, the creativity. So that is really important. And I think most organizations don't have that, at the top level. How do we treat and value time? And then, individuals matter a lot in terms of how they're enacting it day to day. There was a fascinating study a couple of years ago by Slack. They found that people value when they work over where they work, which is a little counterintuitive, especially, during a pandemic era where we think so much about where we work. Employees want that control over their time, and they want flexibility in terms of start and end hours, as well as a whole spectrum of other aspects of time. So that's important, understanding, what do employees want? Some employees want more of that flexibility versus not. And then how is it enacted at the team level, right? How are we developing norms, team agreements, because the reality is most work happens team to team versus any other structure within the organization.
I think a lot of the tools that have been developed over the last 10 years should, in theory, really help with that. So like, Slack and Teams and what have you. I'm not sure they do perfectly just yet, maybe very imperfectly, actually. But in theory, the idea of people wanting, needing, expecting flexible working days and to be able to do the high quality work when their energy levels and their availability is right, that should be able to go with asynchronous work, largely digital work. So you attend to the messages when you are able to, but normally you don't need to respond immediately to a Slack message. I mean, most people are not working at that level of urgency, but somehow it hasn't quite worked. I think there's still a kind of traditional thinking, which is that flexible work isn't kind of the right thing to do. There is this sort of FaceTime visibility, like you were saying, Rebecca. So I think there's a cultural shift, or just like a sort of waking up to, look, we actually do have a lot of the facilities and tools now to make much better use of this resource time, and there should be more of a sort of acceptance, and we should embrace this ability to work asynchronously, because people have such different schedules and life situations. And I think post-COVID, I mean, you mentioned COVID, I think that increased the expectation that people should be able to work when it makes sense for them to work. You know, there's childcare as an obvious example, but just really, you know, if you want to go to for a lot of people, and it's not for everyone, but if you want to go to the gym during the day, but you're going to get, you know, work done, you know, outside of that, and there's a kind of an understood quid pro quo, that should work for people very well, and the tech should enable us to do it better than we are.
Yeah, I think it's the asynchronous piece is really fascinating because, you know, in theory it should help with this, but there's no technology that is innately asynchronous or synchronous. It really is about how we enact it. And, you know, we continue to see in organizations that invest in the Slacks of the world and asynchronous tooling, if they don't have the culture around it, these tools are treated as synchronous. If they don't have a written communication culture, a documentation communication culture, a culture of trust, you know, disassociating urgency from importance, you know, it's absolutely much more driven by the culture than the technology. And I think we over-index on the technology. And again, AI, I think, is, you know, exacerbating this because it's easy to invest in the technology and do the thing and check the box, as opposed to thinking, okay, how are we enacting this technology? Are we positioning it as, you know, a partner to humans or a threat to humans? And that, you know, that also will then influence, are we investing time in learning how to use this technology, or are we positioning it as something that we should, you know, diminish and downplay how much we're using it?
And I think, sorry, Marc, there is something interesting in that in COVID, a lot of leaders have thought about is the accountability you have on looking out for your people. And I think in the AI bubble now, that accountability is for learning, for effectiveness, and yet the way that most companies operate, there is this pressure of we need to take out time because otherwise, so there are very few organizations that have sort of set out to say the time we free up is invested in learning so we can use time better. Right? That loop doesn't always exist. And I think one reflection for me is that it's very easy to center the discussion around people like us that work in offices that have a bit of freedom. There are a lot of other people working in shifts as technicians, as nurses. It's important to kind of keep those with us in our thinking. But when you go to synchronous, I've seen an interesting study end of last year that the organizations that work predominantly in offices versus predominantly remote and that are fully off working, I mean, not hybrid, but predominantly full remote, that the ones in the middle where you would think that's the most interesting place, that's also most of the organizations now, they default to being synchronous. So they have remote meetings or hybrid meetings and they're together. So my question is a little bit, do we need a new breed to learn from? Because you can argue whether a fully remote organization is the best or the only option, and certainly in some of the jobs that doesn't work, but it has taught us something about what is possible. And maybe sometimes you need kind of what in Davos was discussed a lot, creative destruction, right? So deconstruct and build again. So are we at this phase now where humankind has the possibility to start fresh and kind of shake loose some of the old assumptions?
Well, I mean, it does also bring us back to what Rebecca said regarding the system, right? The system itself and the processes and design around them has to change, right? In software engineering, we got quite a few learnings of transition from synchronous system to asynchronous, right? Like this whole thing, right? If you heard about that, the microservices, reactive systems, Kafka's, what's not, topics, this is about that, right? What in software engineering we learn, and then you can think about it, or like how to map it to the humanity, right? Is that the most complex thing is to build the process around this whole thing. The moment you solve it, then every other increment is super simple. It's actually much easier than in the sync system, right? Because it's, a lot of small pieces and they communicate with each other. the moment you build a system to verify that all the messages there and what's not, right, the process is there. Then you can progress much, much faster than with the previous generation of architecture, so it's not. And to be honest, I believe that more or less the same has to happen in cultures and societies, in corporations, in order to make full remote actually the default option, right? The most performant option. It might be not the case, right? Because we still need human touch. We need to get together, work on front of whiteboard, what's not, right? At least I personally, I need it. Like I need people around me and solve problems, like we did yesterday, for example. But in order to give a chance to this system, we have to completely revise like this from scratch, like our systems, how we do business, how we communicate, how we allow people to reply to Slack message in an hour rather than immediately.
I think we need to be clearer on when async works and when sync has to happen. I mean, for example, with this interaction here, obviously that needs to be synchronous. I mean, probably with AI, there's some kind of a way of running this conversation asynchronously, but realistically, it needs to be synchronous.
You didn't know that Rebecca was a hologram.
She is. So am I. Who's the non-hologram here? But I think there's actually something, if you just, I think most people haven't given it much thought. Probably I haven't given it enough thought either, but what are the pieces of work that really do work much better asynchronously? Okay, to give a tangible example, let's say Christian and I are working on a document or an article together. Now we could both get live, let's say remote, but live onto a Google Doc, for example, and be writing on it and editing each other's work. But it's quite hard to think live in the moment, especially when someone else is working in the document, moving things around. That's probably not the most efficient way of doing it. So that's a good example, I think, or a bad example of synchronous. You wouldn't do it that way. It's much better that I have a go at the document first. Christian, over to you. I pass the baton, and he has a go. But with other knowledge work, what are for you and your role? So I'm talking to people watching this now. For your role, what are the bits of your job that really work best asynchronously versus synchronously? I think the COVID period was a wake-up call for us. Of course, there's new possibilities and there's different ways of doing things, but I think we came out of it in a bit of a stupor and not thinking super clearly about when we can really make the most of async versus sync. I want to say one other thing, actually, that just occurred to me. Culture. Culture is a big word, and it's quite hard to change the culture of a company or of society or whatever. But Rebecca mentioned the team level, and I think the culture in a team, or maybe be better think of it as just like the ways of working in a team. So like, I'm available this time and not this time, I'm available on WhatsApp or not, or whatever your personal situation is, and making that really clear with your colleagues about what it is that's okay and what's not okay. That could be done very easily, and anyone watching this, you can do that in your team tomorrow. That's a really practical step. You don't need to change a big culture or anything. You can just have a conversation in the team. Suggest that you have a conversation about this is what's good for me and what's not, and then also people feel more comfortable then that especially more junior people that aren't as experienced, don't have the confidence. If they know that this is okay and this is not okay, you just the boundaries are clear and people can be more efficient, but also be a bit happier and less stressed about work. So ways of working within a team, that team unit, I think, that team level is a really, really important one, and one that people can kind of move forward with immediately.
Yeah, and we know from so much, decades and decades of organizational design research that the level of interdependence matters a lot in terms of how interdependent we are on other people. If we're interdependent but sequentially interdependent, that necessitates different types of asynchronous or synchronous interaction. So if I do something, then you do something, then you do something, and it's in a chain, that can be handled quite effectively asynchronous because the complexity is lower, the handoffs are predictable versus, if we're reciprocally interdependent like we are now, what I say then hopefully inspires what you say and vice versa. That is much more complex in a way that we could not do this effectively asynchronous. And I think that level of complexity is something that, as we think about the system too, is an important input into how we design the time.
I think I believe we need to spend more time synchronously on what we want to build, right? It's because we do not know how we set objectives and describe it clearly. That's why asynchronous doesn't work. So if I say we have Lego bricks and I say let's build a house. You have an idea of a house, you have an idea of a house, I have one. That in itself does. So I start building, asynchronously, and then I give it to you. Hey, cool. Now I build my pool, and then Stefan says, "Why is there a pool? I'm gonna make it into, a bowling alley." And then you build something else, right? So when we spend more time in terms of what do we actually want to do, and then be clear around it, then asynchronous can work. And that's why sometimes it works in development, right? In software engineering, if you know exactly what you need to work on and what the problem that you need to solve, it works. But most of the time, teams and organizations don't spend the time to figure out what they actually want to solve. And that's why, they go on tangents, and then you need to be synchronous again because you need to correct all the time. Right? So, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And then you figure out what you're trying to solve as you go.
I will take us back to culture and team and trust in a second. But just to build on that, I remember when we built the first digital creative agency, we were thinking a lot about, how do you make creativity and global work together? But theoretically, digital was, it's a long time ago, a new way of doing it. We came up with this idea of a pulse and star shape, so that you would go through, and the creative process, design process, it's iterative, it goes places, but it has a certain structure. Creatives need structure as well. So basically what we came up with is, in your analogy, we would say, hey, let's all build a house, and then everybody in their time does what that is, and we send it in, and we share it back, and then we build on each other. So you get this, some creative in Brazil doing their thing with their local culture, and somebody in Berlin was doing their thing, and you have a collision where it builds on each other. So you get the local diversity and different, where it's really interesting. It doesn't become vanilla, but you can still huddle. And I think that interplay is often not designed. And I think going back to the culture, when I think about the example you had with the document, that requires trust. To begin with, there are a lot of people still not comfortable sharing their documents with other people, because what will they do to my document? If we're seeking agency to kind of calibrate between sort of colleague and leader on a team level, is a lot more feasible, and you can maybe sort of achieve the trust needed. But going back to culture, in the sense, obviously culture is different globally, but also a little bit to your point of what is a house, we assume that the view that we have on time and what is expected and what I think you think of me and what I think I should want to do, that's what's getting us stuck. And I think that goes back to culture, sort of our backpack of what we're coming in with. And I think often, even on a team that has worked together many years, that baggage has never been addressed. And maybe data is a way to bring a mirror to this. But I think that's an interesting question. How do we embrace culture and embrace differences to help us actually become a better version of ourselves?
Well, in this sense, if we will look at this from the planning, we as the planning agent, right, or kind of agent that achieves some desires, what's not, or optimize for it, right? What some writer says is that exactly what you, Marc, said. If you're clear about your intentions, right? If you communicate clearly what is important for you, why you do something, what you do, and what's not, then for others it's relatively straightforward to prognose what you will do, and then accordingly change your action so that you as a team start working towards mutual goal, right? So, and maybe it's not more in the cultures. Obviously, some cultures are more straightforward with their language, right? And it's embedded. Some more polite and, like back and forth, trying to convey some thoughts, but in very peculiar way. But the clarity of what you want and what works for you, what doesn't, is something that will help everybody basically, right?
And to put that really concretely, so to use this impossible example of me and you collaborating on a document,
Paradox.
we're trying to do something actually pretty amazing, which is to get my brain and your brain to interact in such a way that there's some sort of output that we're both happy with at the end. That's actually a magical thing. I think one way, just that I generally work in this, if I'm co-writing with someone, is to get aligned. Obviously, we both need some flexibility about what we're going to write,
Sure.
but to get some alignment at the start on, I actually normally say like some bullet points.
Yeah.
So look, are we
Okay.
agreed on this? And let's argue it out and be specific about that. Once you got to that point, you've got the kind of alignment that you can really move forward with. Now, it kind of relates a little bit to your Lego example as well, and other examples that you need to have a degree of alignment and shared understanding in order then that you can kind of go off and then do some different things and be creative. But at least at the end, you're both going to be happy with that kind of output.
Exactly, and that's what that you said there. We need more alignment at the beginning, and then you can asynchronous. So far, many teams say, "Yeah, are we all in agreement?" And then you're on your whatever collaboration system you use. Like you see, half of them are actually video off, others are doing something else, and then it's like, sure, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I have my focus time now. It's like, but what do you know what you're focusing on? Maybe. So I think that this is really having and that's the fault of the organization of teams that are not accustomed to designing it like this. And I think that's where we are now. That's the problem to solve. It's not about asynchronous, or it's not about in-person versus not in-person. Remote could work if everything is aligned in terms of how you do, right? And you come selectively together. But, you don't know, and then organizations now default to, okay, let's go all back to the office, right? Because then at least you can quicker correct, right? Versus, hey, nobody ever wakes up and say, I'll give you a quick Zoom call. You don't do it. But in a meeting, you would say, hey, Rebecca, can I pick your brain real quick? But then when you see a person there, you assume at least is something, worthwhile doing, right? But in fact, you don't know if the person is actually working on the problem, is in their mind somewhere else, dreaming about collaborating with you, right? Like on the document. That could never happen. How we solve that one? And then, bring that together. I think that's why helping organizations in that sense is something that's critical. And then you see actually whether the time is well spent or not.
It's very peculiar and interesting how we transition from thinking about time, our perspective of time, like whether it's biological or communal or what's not, right? We basically transition completely to the teams working together effectively. Just like as a reflection, right? Like we as the social animals or whatever, right? Like humanity, we always tend to think about even our time, not as like our individual time, but subconsciously we just transition to only collaboration mode, how we spend time.
The focus of the time of the institute, right, in the first sort of like wave was a little bit on organizations, right? So I think that's why we transitioned to that. But if you think about, time, then it's often when you think about it in the context of other humans that you spend it with, right? Whatever you do, you collaborate. Even if you just fish and you don't do anything, right? You do it with somebody. It's rarely that you just live a life in solitude, and then have the feeling that you spend I don't know anybody who then would just say I spend my time
in the cave.
Exactly. Well, right? So it's life is about interacting with humans, and then when you do that in a professional setting in a good way, right? Then then if we can help with that, I think then we contribute more than just beyond ourselves.
And I think that's also where the magic happens, where serendipity happens. If everything is planned and finely organized, you don't get that feeling. Speaking of which, this time has sort of just gone by quick. I would like us to... I feel we haven't really gotten back to everybody's hope. We just got... it was super fun to follow this, but maybe we do a quick wrap round on... what is urgent? What do you feel motivated, excited, curious about sort of for the next phase of the institute? We've gotten started. I'm super happy with that. we've talked about a lot of things that could all be teasers and cliffhangers that we will follow back. But if you sort of just do a wrapper on next few months, what do you think is the most important for us to look into? Who do we want to invite? Like what's sort of the next chapter for you? Rebecca, start.
So for me, I've always been fascinated by this disconnect between research, academic research, and practice. And I think when we think about time, we actually know so much. We know so much about asynchronous, synchronous, bursty communication, how we structure time, the mental models. And I think it would be very valuable and, a low-hanging fruit in many ways to compile that academic research and pair it with a so what for organizations. What has the research told us? And it might not give you, path A, B, C, but I think it can help us start to think about, okay, what are the different inputs and outputs and processes that are important?
Yeah, very good.
I would like to, in general, I like the idea of running some experiments to test some hypotheses with a view to changing some behavior for some people, like I was saying earlier. Specifically, I'm interested in, because I think this is a huge modern waste of time, something on procrastination, something on use of smartphones, social media, poor use of AI, which are obviously these are habits that hundreds of millions, actually billions of people have. So anything that touches on that is potentially very big bang for our buck. So experiments along those lines I'm especially keen to be involved with and learn from.
What about some time games that you could have instead of scrolling? You could play games to learn about time.
I would love that, especially if there was some sort of a lesson that you could pick up from those time games. I'd love to get involved with that, yeah.
Well, for me, there are two aspects, right? One is that the AI changing our lives so drastically, right, and dramatically in some ways, in some cases. So for me, it's interesting to start working at least on theoretical foundations for AI safety and how impact of AI, because AI safety is broad discipline, right? Like whatever, like the doom days or it's not, but I'm not about that. I'm more about that the AI generating so much content and it's not so democratized, so quick, then it forces us to spend more time on reviewing, which is also not the most creative work, right? So, and I would like to think and talk to people who deep into that on AI safety from the point of view protecting of the time, right? Okay, if you give a gain here, how the system will regulate itself so that it doesn't generate too much, for example, so that it will negatively impact the time for the time spent on review and stuff like this, right? That would be something that's very interesting for me.
Kind of related to that, I just jump in again. There's a new phenomenon now that we have AI, which is, so you're doing some work. I use AI quite a lot to, for wording sometimes, but also for analysis of data and number crunching, crunching a lot of data, including some of Doodle's data, as you know, Alan. And that feeling when you set the AI off to do some quite complex task that would take you, actually you wouldn't even bother doing because it would be impossible for you to do. And then you get up from your desk and whatever it is you do, like you go make a coffee, it doesn't matter. You've got the AI working expertly on this difficult and important problem for you. That is bliss for me. I absolutely just love that feeling. It feels extremely productive, but in a relaxed way, because you're taking your break while there is an entity that's like really thinking deeply and processing a lot of what you need to get processed. I love that modern phenomenon of aspect of AI and that feeling that it gives me.
Yeah. And I guess that's then the exact moment where human agency kicks in. Do you go and enjoy that coffee and you enjoy that this work is happening anyway, or do you have 3 screens where you work with the next agent on the next thing and you work on, and then it's 2:00 at night, which I think a lot of people are experiencing. Super interesting. Christian?
Probably 2 things. One is figure out if we can actually work on something together. That would be super exciting. And two, I am, I think ultra focused on this state of time, research that we want to understand to start building a language of time. This is not productivity. This is a very specific. It's really understanding, creating a baseline for how humanity, as a whole, across generations, cultures, understands time, and and how we can basically have. Then based on that, see where we're at, and then start a conversation that's more targeted and in a combination with organizations and so on and so forth, to really then advance and be more pointed, right? Versus just solving a symptom. If you understand the problem, you can actually address it. And I think that is both for us as an institute, I think, a fantastic contribution, but it also will then create new avenues where we can explore and work with partners. And even more experts, right, in the field. If we can advance that conversation and that effort in the next half year or so, I think that would be super exciting.
And for you, Christian, this State of Time study is, to some extent, a review of literature and studies that have happened, as well as some new research and kind of blending it all.
It's really, I think correct. And I would actually say it's probably 80-20 new versus existing meta-research. As Rebecca said, there's so much out there already, right? From one of our colleagues, right? Dr. Eagleman from, from the West Coast, right? Who's worked on time forever in terms of the perception of time. I think we kept bringing this together and then synthesizing it for the purpose of this is one aspect, but the other aspect is really primary research in terms of understanding how we perceive time, how we talk about time, etc. And then maybe having something like an index to say time health, right? Do you feel like you're using your time in the best way? It's a little bit like you see these watches now or these systems that say your biological age versus how old you are. Right, so you're 35 and your watch says you behave like you're 50 or you behave like you're 20. Wouldn't it be cool to have something like that for time? You've been 30 years in that measurement on this planet. Have you lived your life, or has it felt like 50 or has it felt like 10, depending on that, right? And if we can, again, just make one step towards that future, to then have a conversation around how we actually create stretch time even out more, that would be super fascinating. Also very nerdy, but also very fascinating.
But I think what's interesting for me with the study is that it's truly global and really looking at the next generation. And by asking questions, we can maybe sort of lift new perspectives as well as connect the dots. But in wrapping up, I think all the things that you said, that's exactly why I'm excited leading this institute, because we need all of those perspectives. And I think for me, the quest now forward is to bring in further perspectives from art. Where can we connect experiments with organizations, use that to bring out the science? Because I think that's where the magic will happen, and where we're obviously super open. If anybody wants to join this quest, we need partners, we need support, because I think the most effective way for us to act is to be this hub melting pot. That's why we also said it's a think tank, but also a do tank. Right? We want to actually activate and support others to be part of this journey. So thanks for your time. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.